Okay, hello again. I'm playing a game on Lichess. I'm playing with the white pieces. The time controls is 10 minutes per game with a 2-second increment, and we're heading into the modern defense. I usually play here the system with the pawn on g3, and the trick here is to pick the right move order, something that doesn't really cause problems with the d4 pawn. The issue is that black hasn't played knight to f6 yet, and this may, in case I just play g3, he may start to attack me with knight c6 and bishop g4, so I might want to start with knight to e2 first. I hope this is a more flexible approach, and as I had predicted, he does pop in his knight to c6. And now the issue is if I go pawn to g3, he'll have bishop g4, so I think I may start it with this move first, just to overprotect the d4 square. So this threat in itself doesn't seem to contain, this move in itself doesn't contain, I think, as much venom here. So again, I could play queen to d2, or I could just follow on with my plan of putting the pawn to g3. In that case, I might start with h3. Downside of starting with h3 is that he might be able to pop with knight of pawn to f5 immediately. I think I'll take my chance and play this anyway. It's a bit of a strange looking move, but the idea is to prevent both knight to g4 after knight f6 and at the same time bishop to g4. So I think he plays knight to e7, and that is keeping the tension on the d4 square, but also that's taking away an important square from his knight on e7 in case I play d5. So now I have good reasons to possibly play pawn to d5. I might want to play it a little bit provocatively and go with pawn to d5 for now. I think he has to go to b8. There's really no other alternative here. And I thought he has some ideas to play pawn to f5, and I thought it would be interesting to try and prevent that in this position. It feels like I might be able to afford that just here. Goes c5. That is interesting. That allows me to capture there. I think he also assumes that I will be playing on the queen side, which is common in this pawn structure, but I think here I actually might just go for a slightly different approach, and I think if I take here, that would allow him to strengthen his center, so I think I have to avoid that and instead go for the development. And my plans here might include castling queenside, of course depending on how it continues with the kingside expansion. So I think one of my plans here, okay, well, this pawn to h6 move means it's going to be increasingly difficult for him to castle. And I think also, I think he'll still be struggling to play pawn to f5. Let's just develop the knight a bit better, opens up the bishop. I'm still not really revealing my plans with respect to, yeah, this is tricky, of course. I think he was both concerned about bishop popping to b5, but he's also preparing b5 on his own. Ultimately, maybe I'm not that concerned about his pawn going to b5, but I do want to have a strategy for that. Basically, I either play pawn to a4, preventing it, or I don't. And if I do, then that will give him some leeway in terms of if I play pawn to a4, my b4 square would get weakened, and he would get some play with queen to a5 and queen to b4 possibly. At the same time, I really don't want to see a5, a4 happening. Sorry, b5, b4 happening. I think I will play this though. I also have an idea at this point to put the pawn on a5, so I think he has to play queen to a5. So both sides have not castled, which does have some implications. In particular, I am probably ready to castle kingside, queenside, whereas I don't think he knows really where he's going with the king. Which means at some point I will want to open up the play with pawn to f4, but I don't want it to be too soon, because then his bishop would become very active. Both sides may be willing to keep their kings in the center. So bishop to d7 is an interesting move, because I think that's also not really making very clear as to where his knight will be going. I'd like to play a5. This in a way is saying that I'm not going to put the king on the queen side just yet. I do have that idea of playing knight to a4 and knight to b6. So I think he has to play pawn to b5 or to b6 immediately to prevent that. Which will give me some ideas as well of possibly playing. Yeah, so he has to play that. That had to happen. And now, of course, I have to decide, do I capture that or not, or let it be? From the positional point of view, it makes sense to capture it and leave him with the potentially weak pawns on a6. So now that the play has shaped the way it has, I think I'm not going to the queen side for sure with my king, and instead I'll just reinforce my position here. The delicate choice is whether do I put the rook on b1 and prepare b4, but I think he'll meet that with pawn to a5. Or do I play b3 and try to hold on to the things this way? If I go, the one thing to keep in mind is that I'm running out of time as I'm talking here so much. So I think I'll just play something simple like this. Again, black has the issue of where is his king going. And I think I have made my decision about where my king is going by basically saying I'm going to the king side. Now I finished development and ready to castle king side. Unless I do change my mind and decide to go for some exchanges. One other idea I have is possibly castling and then going knight to b5 with some ideas of using the pin on the a file as well as chopping on d6 with check. I think that kind of walks into that plan actually. What exactly is he going to do after I play knight b5? Fortunately, he can take on d2 with check and then take with the bishop. So I get the bishop, which is an accomplishment here, but I think a better version would be for me to do all this with the king still on. This will definitely be a very pleasant endgame, I think. But I think I'll aim for a bit more here with castle first. I really don't know where he's going with his rook, and he still may not castle in my opinion. So now knight b5 is a legitimate, most serious threat, because there would be an intermediate move with knight to d6. So what can he do if he goes rook b7, then I just take on a6. I think he's got problems, and I think the other issue is that pawn to a5 does not really resolve any of that. I think his queen would then be very, very trapped. So he has more time, but I think he has problems in this position that might not be easy to resolve. I don't really... Thing is, even if the queen on b4 isn't really in trouble, then there are still issues with his position otherwise, like knight on b8 has no squares. So so yeah, definitely some issues to resolve for black here. I have some other improvement of my position type of plans, in particular with queen, for example, queen to d3, bishop d2, again asking him the question of where is that queen going. And all these development and queen position issues aside, he also somehow has to address the issue of where, well, of the fact that the pawn structure is just worse. The pawn so I think he did not, either he did not see my threat, or he decided to ignore it and created his own threat of pawn to f4. So knight to b5. So I can either capture a few times and then go knight to b5, or I could go knight b5 right away. I'd be really curious to see what his plan is. Is there a forced win after knight to b5? I think she's knight b5, pawn to f4. I think I have to play it more simply. It feels like something I've been given, so it's strange to not take that. So he's not automatically recapturing it back. Well, now he is. Now again I have the same dilemma. Do I just capture on f5 and hope for the best, or do I instead play for something more? Or do I go with knight b5 right away? Well, at least now I could capture potentially with a knight on b5, so I think it's a worthy alternative no matter what, but he still has the threat of pawn to f4. On the second thought, pawn to f4 isn't really that bad of a threat because I will have knight h5 and capture on f5 as check. So I think it's really worth for me playing that. Knight b5, that's where a bit of more time would be really handy. But that's not something that I have. Pawn to a5, sorry, knight to b5. If he goes f4, then I capture on a7. And that looks good. If he goes, so he will take. So he'll take on d2. No, but then I take on d6. Then I just recapture on. Yeah, so let's do this. Now thinking, it looks promising. It looks like it's something that should work. So the issue is that his rook on a7 is also kind of hanging. And it's hanging right now. It's hanging because the pawn on b4 is pinned. And if he just takes on d2, okay, do I take the rook, or do I just take the pawn on d6? Take on d2. The other upside is that if he doesn't, if I just take on d2, then he takes back on b5, and I really got not much. So I think I have to take on d6. And the upside is now my knight will have a beautiful square on f5, but it's not all over yet, of course. His position is very, very vulnerable. I think at some point. So that, how is he planning to resolve this? So the part of the problem is that his bishop on g7 now becomes quite atrocious, and it will take him some energy to revive it, or else I'll set up a strong blockade. So now the question is, do I go to f5 and revive my knight, or do I go to h5 and try to get his? I think I have to do this. So my hope now is that the two bishops will open up and I will be able to control the position that way. It may look like the pawn on f5 is weak, but I think I really hope the black will not have any time to capture it. I hope I'll be able to open up my bishops and get things going as quickly as possible, and it will really not come to that. Time deficit is definitely an issue, but white's position is looking extremely, extremely promising. So I have 2 minutes increment, and would that be enough? That is a good question. So now what? So he's aiming for d6. He's running for the woods, or he's going to f6. It's really a bit hard to tell. One option I have here is to play d6 and try to open him up that way. Just I get to open up my bishops. Seems generally logical. Now what? I just don't know what to do. So the upside of having played what I played was that now I get to pop the just should be the matter of opening up the position as much as possible, it feels like. No matter the cost. With 11 seconds, it's going to be hard to keep talking a lot, I guess. So the hope here is to really pin him up in as many ways as I can. Yeah, bishop f8 is unfortunately very unpleasant. Not something I had been anticipating much. Not something that I like to face with 11 seconds on the clock. I think he... Well, looks like he got checkmated. So yeah, that was a bit fortunate in the end. But it feels like black was really playing with fire all along, giving me two bishops and opening up his king to so many dangers at the end, and just generally never centralizing his king. At the end, I think he had a pretty good chance with bishop to f8, and it might well be that his king was escaping down, but I think he played for my time trouble, and that didn't pan out well for black. So I was fortunate to win this game.